No matter how many wars you fight, no matter how much blood you shed, no matter how much rage you loose, no matter how many demons you face, no matter how many companions you lose, no matter if our kingdom falls, I know that you will return to me in honor.
Hey, how's everybody doing tonight? This is RJ, and if someone could give me a shout out in the comments to make sure that you can hear me and I have everything going correctly. Vaz is here. Vaz, thank you very much. If you'll see in the background, Vaz, the website that you provided for me about comic colors. That's exactly what I'm going to talk about tonight. So it's great to see you here, Vaz. Okay, so I'm going to talk about comic coloring today, and it's something that if you watch my main channel, I've probably done half a dozen videos or more on this whole color thing. But as usual, first of all, I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup and to talk a little bit about a few things, and then we'll get into the main meat of what I want to talk about tonight about the creation of comics and how what a beautiful thing it is and bring the fun back into making comics. And so, just really quickly, as an update, I wanted to tell everyone, as I did last week, that the printing for the Valiant Heroes has been delayed just because it's now run into December and my printer is extremely busy in December. And even if I could get it printed, getting it shipped out in December is a nightmare just because it would get, excuse me, it would get lost in the mail. Everybody's would probably be delayed longer if I shipped it in December than if I shipped it in January. So we're hoping to have the printing started as soon as the Christmas rush is over, Christmas, New Year's rush is over, and get the printing done after that, and then get those books shipped out, just so that everyone know. Also, for the regulars that come here on Wednesday nights, we're going to shake things up a little bit over the next couple of weeks. I'm going to start doing some live streams on Wednesday night with John's Longbox. We're going to do some interviews together with some indie comic creators, and next week we are doing our very first one. I think it's probably 8:30 Eastern, and we're going to have Ethan Van Sciver on. So that'll be on this channel, and it'll be instead of this main thing that I usually do with Make Comics Great Again. I think we're going to call it, me and John going to call it Comic Book Team Up, and we're going to, as I said, probably get on indie comic creators and talk about indie comic production and all that kind of thing. Talk about some crowd-funded books and get the word out there for some great comics, because we're going to talk about great comics, and that's what I hope to do with this channel a lot, is to get people back into reading great comics. So there's that. And of course, you want great comics, there are 2 links in the description for my 3 graphic novels. You can get my 2 superhero graphic novels, order those at the Valiant Heroes Indiegogo site, and my upcoming, well, the Crom the Destroyer, which we are now working on. You can order that through the Crom the Destroyer link. All of those are in the description. So I will be giving a shout out to everyone who's here after I go through my big spiel about color in comics. Probably take me about 20 minutes. And then I'll answer any questions that anybody puts in the chat. If you could just tag me in them, put a question mark after them so that I can go through the questions after I do that. So, as I said, I have gone over this whole thing about comic books and coloring a lot of different times on my regular videos, my Saturday videos, but this is the first time I'm going to do anything about them. Excuse me, once again, with the live stream. So I'm going to go over the very basics of what I've gone over in my other videos, and I'm going to try to go through those with speed. And I think this is something supremely important. Now, I'm going to get to this webpage in the background after a little bit, this brief and broad history of post-Golden Age pre-digital comic book coloring, which is the name of the website that Vaz provided for me, which is a wealth of information, especially in the links. But anyway, the point is that I believe that the coloring for comics is something which is sorely misused right now. Why? Because here's the thing. we know that from scientific evidence that guys from the very beginning, boys from the very beginning, from the time that they can start to see, are attracted to mechanical things, and females are attracted to human faces. It's a simple biological drive within them. And so boys are hardwired from their vision to actually be more attracted from the very beginning to mechanical things. And a story on a page like sequential art is a mechanical thing rather than something human like a human face. So you get men that are attracted to the what not the digital, what am I thinking of, the sequential art. Men are attracted to sequential art. Men and boys are attracted to sequential art more than females, just because it's something that their eye can understand much easier. Now, I'm not going to go over black and white comics because that's an entire that I want to go over, but just not right at this moment. So the point being that also men's eyes and women's eyes are structurally different. We know this from science. There are cells in eyes called M cells and P cells. Women have more of one and men have more of the other. And what it is typically believed is that the reason why it is this way is that women can see more colors than men can, and men's eyes tend to strain out everything except primary colors. Why? Well, the theory is that for women, since we are traditionally, I would say not traditionally, we'll say biologically, historically, women are the gatherers and the caregivers for the children. They need to see better variations in color because you can mistake a plant by its color, whether it's something edible or poisonous. And you can use that same tactic to try and use it as an early warning system for sickness in, say, your child to keep the child alive. You know, if your child is 2 shades of white, whiter than he usually is, the mother usually says, even today, you look pale as a ghost. You know, mothers know why you are sick or when you are sick. And it's because looking at the color of your skin, they can just tell. Guys can't tell that. And the whole reason why guys' eyes, men's eyes, strain out everything but almost when you strain out those colors, you can see shapes and movement better. And being the hunters, you need to see shapes and movement better so that you can kill the thing that you want to hunt so that you can eat, or make sure that you are not eaten by being hunted by something else. Now, there's a very interesting thing. I never talked about this in any of my other videos, but there's a very interesting thing that happened, which is a parallel to this in World War II. It was the fact that after a while, they started to realize that people with color blindness were much better at targeting than people who could actually see colors. So if you had big bomber planes and you wanted a targeter, someone who could pick out a target to bomb, they would want someone who was colorblind. Why? Because since they could only see limited colors, sometimes even just black and white, their eyes were much more attuned to shapes and movement, and they would be able to strain out everything except for those shapes and movement and look at things that were normally supposed to be camouflaged and say, that's camouflage. That's not real. That's not a tree. That's something trying to be hidden. Bomb that. So again, this is of this whole idea of men's eyes and the straining out of color actually being able to see shapes and movement better. And what is sequential art? It's shapes that are meant to imply movement, and that movement happens in between the panel gutters, in between the panels. So in the panel gutters, there is a difference of the movement from one panel of another so that the mind can be brought to a almost television or movie like presentation of these stills in the mind of the individual. Because why? Because they're looking at these shapes and they're inferring movement from these shapes. And guys can do that much better than women because our minds are tended towards that from the very time of infancy. And we have a limited color palette that we can work with because of the structure of men's eyes. So the point is that with today's color palette for current comics, it looks like mud to male eyes. It simply does. There's too many colors being used. That's my supposition. There's too many colors being used. It's a female color palette. And yes, it may appeal a little more to female eyes, but since sequential art is something that is much more attractive to the male eye, it is driving away an audience that it is supposed to actually have, which is typically mainly men. And so, again, you have this feminized mud color palette, which is not attractive to the male eye at all. It is straining the limits of what sequential art can do for men's eyes, trying to put these shapes together and make movement out of them because they can't see the shapes as well because everything bleeds together with this ridiculous color palette. So that's why I would and have for the number of years now said that to go back to the primary color palette of older comics is the way to go with sequential art. If you really, really want to have an audience, especially that male audience who is going to be your main section of your audience, enjoy the book on a subconscious level, you need to have good colors and you need to have a fix on primary colors. Now, I'm talking primary colors here, but I'm not talking just the normal, whatever it is, 7 primary colors, or I'm not even sure how many there are off the top of my head. If we're going back to this article here, a brief and broad history of pre-digital comic books. You're talking about, what is it, 64 colors. Typically, they're going to use 64 colors. It gives a good sketch of them down here, somewhere. Well, this is a good example of what they would usually use. They're using typically 64 colors for a post-Golden Age pre-digital comic book. Now, in the late 80s, early 90s, that jumped up to about 128 colors. But at the same time, for the majority of the older comic books, you're looking at a maximum of 64 colors. DC didn't even use all of those 64 colors. And of those 64 colors, typically you would get colorists who would gravitate towards only a number of those. And so you would have a substantially lower number than 64. But the point is, again, that this is something which attracts the eye of the reader for sequential art. And it is something that is essential if you want to write a really great comic, if you're doing it in color. Having a good colorist and giving direction to that colorist sometimes is essential, if you ask me. Now, I'm still working with different colorists and we're trying to do different things, and we are still struggling a little bit here and there, but I am trying and I am not ignoring this subject at all. Here's another view of some of the color palettes. And by the way, it's something that I also had to go through my printer with because, believe it or not, this is something that your printer is going to come back to you if you're printing a comic book saying, this is the scale we use. These are how many colors we use. You're not presenting your files in such and such a format, and it's just not going to work for us. Redo this, redo that. It's something you're probably going to run into if you're a comic producer these days. Some of them use what is right here. They talked about the CMYK scale, which stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So cyan is blue and magenta is red, yellow is yellow, black, the K stands for black because it takes the end K for black. Anyways, these are your main colors, and what they're going to use is a mix of these colors in order to give you the palette of what you got here. Anyways, there's a couple of other things about a couple other funny things about coloring that I also wanted to bring up. Number one is the fact that since I was diving into this whole color palette thing over the last couple of years, there's also what is called, and I know I've talked to people like Rini, who does Fiendish, who went to art school and all these kinds of things. So there is color theory classes that people who go through art school actually do. So there is a lot of this knowledge floating out there. But coming across some of the things about color is that the human mind associates instinctually some colors with some things. Now, what would these be? Well, off the top of my head, the colors of red and yellow make people hungry. So that's why you have McDonald's or Pizza Hut or a number of other fast food joints using red and yellow a lot. Why? Because those red and yellow colors are going to make you hungry. And so they put red and yellow everywhere, and you get hungrier, and then you eat more food. It's really that simple. Another one would be they found that the human mind tends to, this is not an absolute rule, but tends to view purple as disturbing, and which is why it answers a question I have had for a long time, which was, why in the world is purple a Halloween color? Where does purple come from? I can see black for death. I can see orange for, pumpkins and all that kinds of stuff that is turning orange in the fall. But why purple? Well, purple, because purple is a disturbing color to the human mind. And so they started to incorporate it into Halloween colors. These kinds of things, they're very important, again, if you want to incorporate the idea of color into what you're trying to do with sequential art. So your colorist hopefully should have ideas of these things and how to use them and how not to use them. Another one would be, I've talked about this many times, the idea of, what is it? Orange and teal. Orange and teal, the use and overuse of orange and teal has been part of the color palette of modern entertainment since movies went into color. Why? Because the movie directors learned very early on that these two colors, which are orange and teal, which are the primary colors that you get during sunup and sundown, actually evoke in the human brain a heightened sense of emotion. Why? Because, of course, sunup and sundown is, I'm either being relieved because I'm coming out of the dark, or I'm starting to be a little more apprehensive because I'm going into the dark, which is what the human mind tells you instinctually, even though you might not ever think of it in those terms. And so you had a lot of different, I think, let's say the director for Gone with the Wind, I can't remember who that is off the top of my head, would shoot certain scenes, very emotional, evocative scenes during these times outside in order to get the natural light of orange and teal, so that the people watching the movie would actually get a heightened sense of emotion during those parts of the movie. Now, here's the thing. There have been some people who have shot movies exclusively at these times of day to try to get that heightened sense over a period of 2 hours, almost 2 hours for movies, and it just doesn't work. Why? Because the human brain becomes exhausted with these overuse with the overuse of these colors, because again, it only is supposed to be used to them for a very short amount of time, which is either sunup or sundown. So if you try to extend that beyond its normal boundaries of time, the human brain is either going to become confused or exhausted, one or the other. And so you have a lot of these orange and teal color palettes, again, bleeding into current comics. Let's look at some examples that I've gone over before. The newer, I should say, the newer Conan comics that were coming out of Marvel a couple of years ago, they used orange and teal a lot in their covers. And let me change a couple of these. I'll give you a little bit more to look at here. Some fun color schemes here from Batman and Superman. But one of the other ones, one of the worst offenders was this. There was a Mera, a DC comic from Aquaman, Mera, book. It was a graphic novel put out by DC, and it was colored exclusively in orange and teal. And it was just offensive to the human eye. Honestly, that's what I would call it. And it is this overuse of orange and teal. And it's overuse of these color palettes that just don't work with sequential art. Now, here's the fun thing that I learned with this. I'm not going to go over this entire page. If you want to, I'm sure you could just need to Google the title for it if you want to go read it yourself. Again, it's a brief and broad history of post-golden age pre-digital comic book coloring. And again, it gives some really good resources. But one of the things that I learned from this, and again, I would love to go over this entire thing, but it's not something I'm going to do right now. Maybe little bits by little bits over a little while. But the point is that there's a trick that they played with the human mind when putting in the old colors. And the trick with the human mind is, well, there's several tricks actually that they used. Number one, they had a certain amount of colors, and they would instinctually, as colorists, learn how these colors would work with the newsprint color, which was a whitish yellow. And so they would have to put in actual different colors than they would see in the ink itself to get what they wanted because it was mixing with the newsprint. That was a trick that colorists would use. But at the same time, there you're looking at right here a panel from a Batman Superman book, and they're looking at what Superman's cape is and Batman's uniform is. Now, if you look at Batman's uniform, it's um, much more of a combination of colors than Superman's cape is. Superman's cape is a combination of yellow and red, but Batman has different matches of colors. And again, it's the whole dot printing of the early age of comic books, which was on newsprint, that actually had to use different colors in the exact same place in order to trick the human mind into thinking there was a third color there. So within the the example that they're giving here is within the color for Batman's uniform. They would use black and red in different proportions, but you would get dots of red and dots of black, and that would combine with the white of the newsprint and make it look like a purplish gray, which there is no purple gray there. I mean, that color is not there. It's the human eye telling you that it is there because of the combination of the two colors in the very specific combination that they were on the page. But anyway, this reminds me of something like, I don't know if anybody here would be familiar with the works of Marshall McLuhan. I never really particularly was gravitated towards Marshall McLuhan, but he talks a lot about media and the difference between hot media and cold media. Now, I can't remember which one is which, but he says there's a difference between a static medium like a word on a page and a television screen. Why? Because the television screen is made up of tiny little pixels, and those pixels are put together by the human mind in order for the human mind to understand what the pixels are trying to represent. But when you look at a word on a page, it's just a word on a page. So there's a difference between how the human mind interacts with different kinds of media and mediums. And so he surmises that these different ways and these newer ways of looking at media are going to affect the human mind in the way that humans understand the information being presented. At the same time, though, I would have to make a caveat to this. He's talking about television when he's talking about this digital, what is it, milieu, this digital idea that the human mind has to put it together. Actually, when he talks about film, he says film is the exact opposite. Film is like a book because it's a static picture after static picture after static picture. Yes, it's going in a sequence to make it look like it's moving, but it's just a static picture. Your mind doesn't put it together. But anyway, my point being, to compare that with this is the fact that with these dots on a page, which was the original way of doing color for your books, it was the human mind putting these dots together, which are two different or three different colors, sometimes four, in order to make a color that wasn't actually there. So again, something very interesting. I'm not actually going to be presenting anything which is to say, here's my argument today, and this is the way that I think it should be. No, I'm just saying this is fascinating stuff within the history of comics and the history of making great comics, which is what I want to get back to. So here's a good one here. They're talking about the fact that you could use more and enhanced kind of coloring on your covers, and they would actually have editors for those because they would edit those pictures. And here's a good example of what they're talking about the fact that when they actually had to produce, let's say, a cover, it would basically be colored on various plastic sheets, and each of these sheets would have a different color on it, and then you put them all together and it would make the final product, which they would then photograph and then turn into a plate. So it's an extremely long process and very complicated. And even though they would say the people who did the coloring at the end of the process were basically just people that you could rip off the street and the equivalent of a bag boy at a grocery store, which is what they said here. And is how they are talked about in various places that talk about the history of coloring for comic books. But anyways, there is a significant jump they talk about here within the fact that when you got to, I can't remember, it was about 1989, and you started to get Baxter paper, which was the superior paper, which was printed on books that were exclusively direct market. The first one being, I think, Camelot 3000. If you'll see here, the colors on the left are the colors printed on newspaper, and the colors on the right are the exact same colors printed on Baxter paper, and how the colorists had to learn all over again what the difference was between the colors. And here's a picture from Camelot 3000. On the right you have newsprint, on the left you have Baxter paper, and so you'll see the difference in coloring and how this affects what your comic is actually going to look like. But what we have today is digital colors that you can have every color under the sun. There's an almost unlimited amount of colors that you can use, and it is simply bled together in order to create something that is not attractive to the human eye. I would say, and here is my supposition, my proclamation for my books anyways, and I would say the future of comics. You need to go back to a very primitive scale of coloring in order for everything to look dynamic, fresh, new, exciting, like old comics were, because of these various things that I have just gone over. And the thing is that in order to do that, it's something like the revolution that we see right now with people going back to, what is it, like 16-bit computer graphic games and trying to create those over again. This is exactly what comics need to get back to. I think, honestly, one of the reasons why manga does so well is because it's in black and white. And not to say that everything should be in black and white, but at the very least, it doesn't have these problems in any way with coloring that North American comics have driven themselves into with this new digital age of coloring. Well, see, I think I've gone over my 20 minutes here, well over my 20 minutes, but I want to talk. I love this subject about coloring in comics. Because I love making comics. And so I'm going to see who's here, give a shout out to people, and see if you have any questions in the comments, because I would like to try and make sure that we limit these live streams to about an hour, because that's all I can handle, quite honestly, these days. So Vaz is here, and I want to thank Vaz. He is the one who brought this website to my attention and got me going down this rabbit hole with coloring once again. Dirty old fatty is here. Oh, sorry, old dirty fatty. All right. Not sure I've seen you here before, fatty, but nice to see you. Samuel is here. Tony is here. Bethel is here. How y'all doing? Tony says, are you going to interview the occasional old timer comic pro? Yes. I would like to concentrate more on indie comic producers, but again, we have Ethan Van Sciver, and I would call him an old timer comic pro in certain fashion. We're looking at possibly getting Mike Kustovich as well, who is doing the inking for my Crom the Destroyer book and did the pencils for the Rampaging Thor, which is coming out with the Valiant Heroes. He also did the inks for the last chapter of Thomas Valiant #1. So he's been working in comics since, I think, 1981, but he hasn't worked in mainstream comics for quite a while. But we will try to get him on as well. Let's see. Scrolling down. Mystic is here. How you doing? Mystic says, primary colors. I wonder, let's see, show this up. I wonder if that explains Superman's color palette. Yes, it does indeed. I would say that is Superman. They actually reference this in here. The fact that they had the inkers, the people who produce the ink, actually produce specialized colors for the inks that they would not produce for other people, that would be for Superman's colors. So yeah, it was a very specific color for Superman, especially back in the early days when they were doing non-digital printing of comics. Let's see. Samuel is here. Samuel says, "Is this stream going to be about the Marvel Age issue that goes into pre-digital comic coloring? The logo isn't using the logo it's using is very similar, just a color change." Yes, actually, that's one of the things. I'm not going to go into that, but that's one of the resources that this web page that I have in the background talks about, and says you should go and read that if you want to delve into a little more depth about this entire issue. Samuel also says 64 colors, all just variations of cyan, magenta, and yellow. The variations being the percentage of how much you use one of the three: 25%, 50%, 75%, and 100%. Exactly. So Samuel is given the basic rundown of what they talk about here in this article and in that Marvel Age book as well, if you want to go and look those up. Again, this webpage has some really good resources at the end of it as well. Let's see. And again, Samuel points out the lower the percentage, the smaller the Ben-Day dots, which is exactly what they talked about when they were coloring Batman's uniform. So let's see. Vaz says, in Transformers, the Decepticons use a lot of purple while there is almost none in the Autobots. I had never noticed that before. That is a very good thing to bring up when we're talking about purple being slightly disturbing. So let's see. And Vaz also says, in superheroes, a lot of villains also use purple. Yeah, I noticed that as well. After learning about the whole purple thing, and again, this is not a hard and fast rule. People on my other videos would say, "Hey, I like purple. Does that mean I'm disturbed?" No, it just means that you like purple. But the human mind tends to, for some reason, I would say it's probably something to do with the environment, something to do with, I don't know, food, something to do with fire, something to do with the natural colors around us, that actually tends the human mind in that direction. So, Vaz, let's see what else we got here. Samuel says, I've been using a Photoshop brush that replicates this system. It's a lot of fun. It's almost addicting, actually. Yeah. Um, I want to get more into going back to older colors if I can. Just to let everyone know, if you've ordered any of the books from the Valiant Heroes campaign, the Rampaging Thor, it takes place in 1943, if I remember correctly, 42, 43. Anyways, I got different colorists to do that. Someone who actually is used to doing flats and old school coloring. I can't remember off the top of my head what his professional name is. I wish I could, but he did some of the coloring for Milestone when it was originally out with DC. So, he's an older comic colorist, and he knows his stuff with older comic colors. So let's see. Bethel says the new Conan comics for Titan is much worse. Jim Zub is ruining Conan. Is he? I still have not gotten to any of those books because, again, my local comic shop closed down, and I just haven't got to order them. I was going to order them in bulk, just the whole first 10 issues or whatever else when I could get them. But I have not. I know that Jim Zub really destroyed the Conan story within those new Marvel books that he did. So I'm not surprised if he's doing the same with the new books that he is writing. They have spectacular art, much better than Marvel had. I can tell you that right off the bat from looking at them. But yeah, I was leery about that fact that he was writing the stories as well. Bethel also says, in making currently the video where I state where Jim Zub is ruining Conan, hope to release it today. Oh, very good. I'd like to see that. You want to put the link for it in the description. If you released it today, go right ahead, Bethel. Let's see. Vaz also says, Bethel, even though it's no Savage Sword from old, I found it better than what was produced in recent years. Yeah. Well, again, That's the thing about Jim Zub. I would say he starts off strong and then things tend to slide. So again, I can't speak to what is going on right now, but it wouldn't surprise me. Mystic says Marshall McLuhan was a Canadian all the time in those heritage moments. There was also a Joe Schuster one that was grossly inaccurate. Okay, I will take your word for that. Let's see. Vaz has a question. Says RJ, what would I want the industry? What I would want the industry to stop using is the bisexual lighting color scheme. It gives an awful visual. Well, again, that color scheme is a purple and a pink, is it not? And again, those are the purple is a disturbing color to the human mind, and pink is a feminine color, which doesn't tend towards the male eye, and you're going to get the male eye most commonly in sequential art. So yeah, I can see why people are so off put by the use of that color scheme. Vaz also says Baxter paper was so nice when it came around. Primary colors were so bright on it. That was the thing it talks about right here. It talks about that I'm looking at here with this the I'm sure Vaz, you know this because you've read this site. The difference in colors and how more vibrant they were on Baxter paper, and the people who were colorists had to learn all over again how to mute the colors because they were showing up much brighter than they originally thought they would within the Baxter paper. And if you're wondering, by the way, we're trying to get, since the Valiant Heroes, the book that I'm trying to get printed right now, it's going to be shipped both as floppies, individuals as stories, and all together as one big graphic novel. I'm trying to get them to print the floppies on what is basically Baxter paper. They don't have access to what is Baxter paper, but the closest estimation to it, because they simply won't print on newsprint anymore. I can't find anyone here that will print on newsprint. So we'll just have to deal with the Baxter paper, and hopefully the colors will come out in a very beautiful way, like I am trying to do with the throwback to the original color palette, especially for the Rampaging Thor. Let's see. Bethel says, not if you're a true Conan fan, because it attacks Conan on a level of his abilities that make up Conan and on the level of what the hero is. That's exactly, Bethel, by the way, you're replying to Vaz, but that's exactly what I felt with Zub's run of Conan within the recent Marvel Comics, was because the whole thing was centered around the idea that this witch, which was trying to create a blood spell, actually kept Conan alive all those years. It wasn't Conan's actual skill that kept him alive. It was her keeping him alive all that time so he could spill more blood so that she could make her spell as powerful as possible. So yeah, that nerfs the character completely. So I really, even though it was an interesting story, I just did not like where they were going with that. So I agree with Bethel on that. Let's see. Magma Mooks is here. Says, RJ, do you think there is something unique or special about superheroes that distinguishes them from heroes of other genres? Let's see. Yes, I certainly do, but that is a broad topic to actually tackle. Number one, if we're looking at the fact that these comics are something that was typically, but not exclusively, being used for kids to read, I would say older comics were a range of were in a range where you could get the very young and the very old reading them at the same time, which is what I try to do with my books. So when you have something like that, you have an attraction to the, let's say, outline of a hero that is very broad. And so the superheroes had these very broad strokes of characteristics and the ideas that I'm always talking about, which is that a true traditional hero is made up of virtues. And those virtues were present over and over again within a lot of different comics and presented to young audiences as if they were new, because they would be new to young audience, and older audiences, to make them feel the excitement of youth and the idealism of that heroic ideal itself. So I completely hold to the idea that yes, superheroes from comic books are much different than many other kinds of heroes. And again, the visual and the presentation of the visual also plays a huge part in that as well. So again, that's a giant topic, but to answer it in a concise manner, I would say yes. Let's see. Scrolling down. Bethel and Vaz are having a little debate about Conan in the comments. So I'll just go down a little farther. Let's see. Michael is here. How you doing, Michael? Michael says, once again, YouTube didn't tell me you were live. Unfortunate. I tried to, at the very least, do at least 15 to 20 minutes of warning for when I'm going to go live. So hopefully YouTube will announce it to people. But the best I got is to trust that the YouTube algorithm will indeed let people know. Pedro is here. How you doing, Pedro? Pedro says, hello. Now is very early. Good for me. Yes, I'm doing an earlier stream today. That's in preparation a little bit for the stream next week, which is going to be 8:30 Eastern. So we're going to do our interview. John's Longbox and I are going to do our interview with Ethan Van Sciver. So let's see. Bethel says, RJ, will you always stream at this hour? I would like to, but I don't know if that's possible. Although I think that when I do my stuff with John, since he's an electrician and he works hard and he has to get up very early in the morning in order to take a train out to where he is working, he needs to have a much more fixed schedule than I do. So we will probably be hammering down a hour or hour and a half where we typically will be doing those interviews that we're going to be doing together. So it will become a little bit more regular, and I would like to do it a little earlier like I am tonight. Let's see. Vaz also says, what is the current kind of paper used in comic books? When you find a printer for your story, do you have to decide the kind of paper? Well, you can. Let me put it that way. You can. If they are printers, and I found a printer who was actually used to printing floppies and some graphic novels. So they had experience with those different kinds of paper already and were able to present to me what was used prior and in their printing and what would be the best with my color palette. So it really depends on the printer that you find and if they're used to printing comic books and graphic novels. But yes, it is something that I would say if you're going with a printer that is not going to be very hands-on, they'll probably pick the entire thing for you and just go with, I want the cheapest, or I want a good quality, or I want glossy, or these different very broad uh, very broad ideas of what you're going to use for paper. But if you have one that is going to work with you very closely, then you get to pick the paper and everything that you want to have it printed on. Again, all depends on the printer, and there are so many of them out there these days that it is depends on where you live and where you go. Let's see. Bethel says, RJ, your statement about Jim Zub Conan run is exactly on point. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that really just destroyed the character in my eyes in that new run. Let's see. Mystic says, I recall that Lex Luthor palette was green and purple. Is there any particular significance to his use of green? Not that I can think of off the top of my head, but there probably is. But again, here's some good ones from The Dark Knight Returns, where they're talking about putting in, is it airbrush or I think watercolors or something like that. So it's talking about the evolution of colors, but I'll just put that beautiful picture up there in the background to give you a little bit more. Pedro also says, RJ, what kind of thematic of superheroes is appropriate for children to watch? An example could help. What kind? I'm not sure. I would say, honestly, here's the thing. A lot of people get on my case about the fact that I think that the Comic Code was actually a good thing. Not to say that because they misunderstand what I'm trying to say. I say it's a good thing because it actually provided a separate, independent level of editing that the comic book producers could lean on and so save themselves some money and not have to worry about, fighting with this or that. Um, Sometimes with this or that government body, quite honestly, because you'll find this throughout the history of comics and games and everything within American history, that when things get really popular, then the government steps in and they just muck everything up. But, anyways, the point is that it did help to a certain extent um, make the stories more uniform, giving them rules that they could use and things like that. So, that being said, I'm not here to praise the comic code. That's not what I'm doing. But I'm saying that what kinds of stories, what kinds of themes for superheroes is appropriate. Again, and you're talking about children. For myself, I'll give you my own uh, basic standard for what I'm going back to. Again, I'm going back to what is basically, but not strictly, the 1982 Comic Code, with ideas in it that, you can't have too much blood, you can't have too much gore, which honestly, to me, the best horror movies, old black and white horror movies, they didn't show these things. They inferred these things, and it became much more disturbing to the audience in a certain way. To find ways around using direct, let me see, direct things like blood and gore, gives you an interpretation of a series of events that sometimes is unique and sometimes works beautifully. Let me put it that way. So yeah, I try to tend away from, don't put too much blood on the page, if any. We just did some coloring for I think it was Thomas Valiant #2, and and even for Thomas Valiant #1, there was certain pages where I had to say to my colorist, no, that's not supposed to be blood, please take that out. So there's things like that, but those are the visuals. But you're talking about themes. I would say, again, any theme that revolves around the ideas of heroism is going to revolve around the ideas of virtue and its opposite, which is vice. So you can put a whole lot of things in the story about virtues and vice for children, and they can understand it, and it can be kid appropriate. And it is at the same time appealing and very intriguing to older audience as well. So I can't give you an example per se, except for older comics that I would say, again, most people look at them and say they're being strangled by the comic code. I would say no, they were being strangled by the comic code and so found new creative ways to present what they exactly wanted to present. And that new creation allowed for telling of stories and subject matter in ways that were much more impactful. So again, I can't answer that question directly because I can't give you an example off the top of my head. But again, I got no problem. Let's say people ask me, give me a reading list. They used to, a long time ago in my channel, several years ago, I got a lot of people saying, give me a reading list. I have children. Who do I read to them? And I would say, honestly, Tarzan, um, John Carter of Mars, these things are science fiction and fantasy, if you want to go in that direction, that are appropriate for kids. They were not meant for kids. They were meant for an older audience, an older boy, teen audience, if I do remember correctly, but they're certainly appropriate for kids. And you have older stories like the Odyssey, the Iliad, you have Virgil's Aeneid, and they deal with subject matter. I mean, the Iliad, I would read to children, quite honestly, but it is graphic in some of the violence that it portrays. But again, I would say that is appropriate for children because the Iliad, the Odyssey, especially Virgil's Aeneid, those were the books, and especially Virgil, that were the adventure stories for boys before there were such things as comic books, before there were such things as pulp novels. And you would add to that, stories of Robin Hood. A lot of different stories like these are very appropriate for children. And if you go back and read them, you'll see that a lot of the things that are in these stories would not pass today by being presented to children, quite honestly. Most people would say, no, no, we're not showing that to children. We're not reading the Iliad to them. And, where, what is it? They take, not Patroclus, but, who is it? Hector, they take his body, and I think it was Achilles took his body and then put a rope through the ends of his feet, and dragged him around the city, on the back of his chariot, just desecrating his body. I mean, yeah, I'm sorry that is a disturbing thing, but that's war. And I would say that's a children's story. Although, if you really want to get a children's version of it, there was an ancient Greek version of it, which was the Battle of Mice and Frogs, or Mice and Toads, which again did the exact same thing. They just put, anthropomorphic, frogs and mice in there. But anyways, so yeah, I can give you those examples, and there's plenty more of them. Things like, oh, Irish mythology, especially Lady Gregory's retelling of Irish mythology. She does beautiful. There is a collected works of hers, things like that. If you ask me, those are the things that I use as my guide for telling stories that are appropriate for children and adults at the same time. Sorry to go on so long about that. Let's see. Tony says, any thoughts on what Marvel did to Mystique? I'm trying to steer clear of that because I really did. Well, let me put it this way. A couple of years ago, I think this is what they were referring to a couple of years ago about what they were going to do with one of the X-Men characters. I did a video on it, and I said they better not do anything to Nightcrawler because it was one of my favorite characters. At this point, I am so done with Marvel that I just don't care. Honestly, don't care. I might rail against it a little bit in a video here and there to show up what they're trying to do in their agenda, but honestly, don't care. Let's see. Oops, wrong one. Let me see. Magma Moose says, RJ, have you ever read Thorgal? I am not sure. That does not sound familiar to me. Off the top of my head, it does not. Michael says the Green Lanterns were weak to the color yellow, so they explained why like 30 or 40 years later. I think they explained why, in like a book that was probably 1988, one of the Green Lantern Corps. I think I have that one. Let's see. Scrolling down. Michael also says the chocolate syrup in the shower in Psycho is a good example of what he's talking about. Oh, thank you. That is a good example. Let's see. Vaz also says Ulysses 31 is a science fiction anime retelling of the Odyssey. It was cool for its time. I have not heard of that before. But there are so many great retellings of the Odyssey. Quite honestly, one of the more fantastical retellings would be Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which is supposed to be a retelling of the Odyssey, quite honestly. But again, if you want to go back to those great stories, there are plenty of great stories out there that are equally appealing to children and to adults. And I just gave you a sample of that list, which I used to give out to people. There are so many other great ancient, medieval, and early modern stories that were precursors to the pulp fiction that we get in the early 1900s. So great stuff. So I have gotten to the end of the chat, and usually when I get to the end of the chat, I just let everybody know that I have had a great time here, and I want to thank everyone very much. And once again, just to let everyone know before I go, I'm going to play the Crom the Destroyer video, since I put the second one at the first and went to the first one at the end. But anyway, my point is that next week we're going to do, John Longbox and I are going to do a joint video together on this channel, which is an interview. It's going to start, we're going to try to nail it down at 8:30 Eastern with our guest is going to be Ethan Van Sciver, and we're going to try to do more and more of those, sometimes I think on this channel, sometimes on John's, and to get into talking to a lot of comic producers, indie comic producers, and sometimes older comic producers to to question them on my part. Anyways, John is I'm sure just going to have his normal amount of fun, but I want to, as usual, grill the people on, making great comics and how they have in the past got those great comics out into the world and made them so beautiful. And that's really what this series is all about. So I want to thank everyone for showing up tonight. And as I said, I'm going to leave you with the trailer for Crom the Destroyer, and I will see you all again next week. Bye.
An age ago, the beating heart of our people was a king who knew only victory. He wanted nothing more than an honorable death on the battlefield. Yet, none could match him, and so he wandered the earth, becoming lost in time and tide. Then we too lost our honest purpose, while silk-clad men sat upon the throne. But tremble now, all cities that lay under the stars, for out of the shadows and mists of the land of promise, our courage has been rekindled, our heart has returned, and the world will burn.